So, unfortunately, David Lynch died this month.
Yeah, no more Twin Peaks. And I really had hoped that there would be some more.
Who is going to make PlayStation commercials now?
Did David Lynch make PlayStation commercials?
Oh man, you don't know about the PS2 commercial?
I guess not.
You should look it up. It's 100% David Lynch.
He actually did it, or it's supposed to be like a David Lynch thing?
No, he actually did it.
Interesting. Okay, I can't imagine him ever playing a video game.
It's why I bought a PlayStation 2. So what'd you check out this month?
Someone in the comments recommended something called Henkei Shoujo, which is a series of 5 short episodes. They're like a minute long each from 2017. These are anime shorts that are extremely goofy. It's basically these cute girls doing, for the most part, normal stuff, and then they will just suddenly transform into a car or into a plane or into a robot or whatever. And the way they incorporate the kind of fan service you normally get and stuff like that is really funny. Like, they'll have a girl transform into something, but you'll be able to, like, see, I don't know, her bra in a shot, but she doesn't look like a human anymore. It's a robot. So I don't know. I thought they were really good. I thought they were really funny. I know they did some manga relating to it as well, and I was going to try to read those because they are on their Instagram page. But I wanted to try to read them in Japanese, and I need to get back into that whole state of things, and I just don't have time right now. So would I recommend them? If that sounds funny to you, I would say check them out. They're on YouTube, I think. I think that's where I watched them. And again, they're really short. So thanks for whoever made that recommendation, because I did enjoy them. I watched Captain Blood from 1935.
That's a good name. Is that an Image comic?
It could have been. It turns out the guy's last name is Blood, so there's nothing overly violent about it. Well, I mean, people do die. So Errol Flynn is this guy back in whatever time back in England where the government is rounding up people that they see as potential traitors.
Yeah, I think that's 2025.
Errol Flynn gets picked up and ends up becoming a slave when he is bought by Olivia de Havilland, who clearly has a thing for him, but doesn't understand that since she's in a royalty position, he's not comfortable with, like, somebody's buying me and turning me into a slave. It was kind of funny, the way, I don't know, the dynamic of, like, how she doesn't understand that. And then he ends up escaping and becoming a pirate, escapes with a bunch of other slaves. And they say, if the government's going to treat us like this, we're going to treat the government like this and just steal shit from them. And then, of course, because of the era, the two of them end up, I don't know, developing their romance more. So in some ways, it's kind of predictable, but it was a good movie. I feel like besides The Adventures of Robin Hood, this is the other Errol Flynn movie that I kind of hear things about, and it was good. I can see why people single this one out. It was the first time that Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland were in a movie together. I think they did 8 movies together total, so I can see why they kept pairing them together. They're both good in this movie. You also had Lionel Atwill, who I know from the Universal Monster movies, and Basil Rathbone, who was really good in particular. He really stood out as being in a different role from what he normally plays. I didn't recognize him at first, but he was really good. That just shows how good he was. So I would recommend it if you're into older adventure movies like that. I'm not into pirates and stuff like that. I don't get the appeal of that. But really, that stuff comes in more in the second half of the movie, and it's just a good movie. So I would recommend it to people that are fans of classic adventure stuff like that. I watched Mad God from 2021, which you talked about before. This is that stop-motion Phil Tippett movie.
Yeah, you better not disagree with my opinion.
Well, it sounds like maybe you liked it more than I did. I have been looking forward to this for a long time, and I will say from a production standpoint and an effects standpoint, it was one of the coolest and most impressive things that I've ever seen.
Okay, we're aligned so far.
Okay. For me, I think it was just the content that I kind of was like, oh, okay, this is just weird. It feels like it's weird just to be weird.
Yeah.
And without much in the way of narrative. I mean, there's narrative there, but it feels like it's just kind of an excuse to get to some more weird stuff.
Yeah, it almost seemed like, I don't know, vignettes. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and maybe if there had been something to make it kind of a little more coherent, I think I would have enjoyed it more. But I did enjoy it for what it was.
Yeah, okay. So we have pretty much the same opinion on this.
And I'm glad at least some kind of cool stop-motion thing is still being made nowadays, that somebody is still working in that field. I'm glad Phil Tippett is still out there doing stuff. I watched the new Nosferatu from 2024.
Okay, don't say too much, because I haven't seen it yet. I mean, for me, what really intrigues me for this version is the director.
So for those who don't know, this is a remake of the 1922 silent movie, which was an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula. I was surprised at how much this version took from the book that was not in the original version. So it's not just a remake of Nosferatu, which was also remade in 1979, but this also incorporates material from the book. So in the credits it even says based on Nosferatu and Dracula. I thought it was a good movie. It was very well made, very well put together. But for me, it didn't really have anything that made it stand out from other Dracula movies, other than I did like the style of it, but it wasn't pushed enough, I thought. I'm a big fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, and this one made me think of that for a couple reasons. It brought in the love story angle between Dracula and the Mina Murray character, which was not part of the book, and was not in the original Nosferatu either. The ending of the original Nosferatu seems to have been kind of the inspiration for that element of this version, but it wasn't the same. This one was a lot more like the 92 Dracula, and even some of the kind of the way the supernatural side of Dracula was portrayed, or in this case Count Orlok, was similar to that version of Dracula. But that Dracula is very stylized. It pushes things really far, and I really, really like it. And this one is also stylized in a slightly different way, but it used some of the same visual tricks that one did, especially when the Jonathan Harker character is in the castle at the beginning. And it just kept making me think of that Dracula. And I like that Dracula so much more than this one. This one is still good. It's still probably one of the best Dracula movies. Well, not probably, it definitely is. But it's just Dracula again. I've seen so many different versions of Dracula at this point. This one didn't do enough to make it stand out. Definitely the stuff toward the end was the most unique, I think, and the kind of the Mina Murray character, her kind of psychic connection to Dracula, which is there in the book and in the 92 Dracula. But the way they portrayed that was a little bit different here, but it just needed more to make it stand out. So it's definitely not bad, but I didn't personally get a whole lot out of it. I thought it was weird and distracting that it takes place in Germany, but everybody speaks English, when it seems to be going for kind of a more authentic feel. And, you know, it's a more artistic movie that you're getting from this director. So I expected something a little more non-mainstream to just make everybody speak English. So that was weird and kind of disappointing. I was thinking it would be cool to do a modern kind of silent movie version where there's either no dialogue or all the dialogue is subtitled or something. I was hoping that's what this would be, but it wasn't. You've got Nicholas Hoult as the Jonathan Harker character.
I know what a huge fan you are of Nicholas Hoult.
I thought he was more tolerable in this movie than anything else I've seen him in, but I still did not think he was very good. It's weird to see all these other actors acting, and then you cut to Nicholas Hoult, and he just has the same blank expression on his face that he always does. I thought Lily Rose Depp, as the Mina character, did a really good job, which kind of surprised me. I don't know, I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of Johnny Depp's daughter, but she was good.
Mm-hmm.
Willem Dafoe was good as the Van Helsing character, but I couldn't help, again, comparing him to Anthony Hopkins. It seemed like they were kind of going for the same general feel, but Hopkins pushed it farther, and I liked his version more. And then Aaron Taylor Johnson was in this too, and he's a good actor. It feels kind of weird because I feel like he's known for kind of his big, dumb mainstream things like the crappy Godzilla movie or like the Avengers or whatever. But he's good in other movies, and he's good in this. So I thought he fit in a lot better than Nicholas Hoult. At least Nicholas Hoult wasn't as bad as Keanu Reeves in that other Dracula. So from there I went back and rewatched the 1922 Nosferatu, which I had seen a long time ago. I remembered really liking the vampire stuff, but thinking the rest of it was kind of boring. Watching it now, I did not feel that way. I thought it was a good adaptation of the book. I did think the Jonathan Harker guy in this version way overacted. Even for silent movie standards, it was way too much. The vampire stuff is great, and this is the movie that introduces the idea of vampires being killed by sunlight, which is a change from the ending of the book. So this version is cool. There's a reason that it's regarded as a classic. I watched the Yakuza from 1974. I watched this movie in like 4 sittings, so I didn't completely follow the plot by the end. I didn't really know what was going on. But I can say that it was a good movie. I did enjoy it. I just had to kind of each time try to vaguely remember what was happening. So you've got Robert Mitchum as a guy who goes to Japan. He was there after the war and had kind of like a romance and made some friends and stuff. And now he has to go back because one of his friends was involved with the Yakuza and stuff's going on. I don't remember exactly. I thought Robert Mitchum did a really good job here. Usually he tries too hard, I think, to come off as cool. And he didn't do that here. I thought his performance in here was a lot more genuine. He felt like he was really playing a guy and not like a cool icon character or something like that. So I thought he was really good here. His friend in Japan, or at least one of them, is played by Takakura Ken, who is one of the main reference points in Dandadan. That's actually the name of the main male character in Dandadan. And I didn't know who that was. So that was a reference that I didn't get watching Dandadan. I had to read about it somewhere. And then now I happened to watch a movie that he was in, so at least I know who he is now. This is still early on in the whole New Hollywood era, 1974. You can see how they're pushing the violence and pushing the language. I wasn't expecting the F word to be thrown in there. You get to see people's limbs get chopped off and stuff. And it works. It was good. It didn't feel gratuitous or like it was just doing it just because it could. It fit with the movie. The one kind of issue I had with it was some of the editing during some of the action scenes. It's not an action movie, but there are scenes where people are fighting, and some of it was hard to follow. You would get these weird, really fast cuts to angles that you haven't seen before. So before you have time to process what you're looking at, you're already on to the next angle, then you're on to the next one, and you don't really know what's happening. And it's intended to make it look hectic and everything, but I think it was too much. I think it was too hard to tell what was going on sometimes. But I did think it was a good movie. I read Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak, I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, from 2022, which was a thriller book that I saw categorized as horror, but I would not call it horror. So the concept is you have this woman who takes a babysitting job, and the kid that she's babysitting draws pictures, and sometimes he draws weird pictures where he says he's being told what to draw by someone that his parents say is an imaginary friend, and these drawings sometimes show weird stuff like a guy dragging a body through the woods or burying a body, and they often show a weird monster type character like a skeleton banshee creature thing, which is supposedly the kid's imaginary friend. So I thought this was a really lame premise. I read this for a book club, so it wasn't really my choice. Somebody that I talked to said it sounded like a generic bad horror movie, and I said yes, but it also made me think of all these procedural ghost shows that you get, like The Ghost Whisperer or whatever, or like Medium, or any of these like CBS, NBC procedural shows where every episode they have to solve a new crime or whatever. It's basically the same thing, but stretched out as a book. It was kind of weird because the writing was actually good. The quality of the prose itself was solid, but the concept was not interesting. It was very derivative. And it turns out that the story itself was really dumb. So I'm going to spoil it because I don't care about this one. This was not a good book. So it turns out that the kid is actually a little girl, not a boy, who was kidnapped from her mother when the new mother got into a fight with her. I can't even remember exactly what was going on. The little girl was wandering off into the woods or something, and this other mother saw her and went after her. And then the real mother thought that she was going to kidnap her or something, so they got in a fight, and the fake mother killed the real mother. And of course, the real mother is the imaginary friend that is now talking to her daughter, who thinks she's a boy. And so she's telling the kid to draw these pictures to try to give the babysitter clues as to how she died. And, to kind of reveal the truth. And that whole concept has so many holes in it. And it's all because the author, in his notes or whatever, he talks about how he came up with the idea of incorporating pictures into the story somehow and then tried to come up with a story. So the story doesn't make sense for why the images exist. So this ghost first is just telling the kid to draw pictures, but then starts possessing the kid and even the main character at some points. So when the kid's drawing them, they're just stick figures and stuff. But when the ghost starts possessing people and starts learning how to control them, you get these really detailed, high-quality pictures. But if the ghost is trying to get this message across, there would be so many easier ways to do it. The characters end up having to try to put these pictures together and figure out the story, piece them in order and everything. Why would the ghost not just draw a comic strip that clearly explains everything? In the drawings, you have this woman with angel wings that seems to be attacking somebody and strangling them. And it turns out that the mother of the kid has angel wings tattooed on her back. So why not draw somebody with angel wings tattooed on their back? Why draw a person with literal wings, like, you know, an angel figure? Why not draw just a stick figure of the kid? Or since she can draw very clearly, why not draw the kid, draw an equal sign, and draw a girl and say, this is the girl? Why not clearly draw the parents, the fake parents, and show them murdering somebody? That would clear everything up. But instead you have all these shadowy figures and all these artistic compositions and stuff, and it just does not make sense for the ghost to do things like this. And why would the ghost not just write out a message? Why is it in pictures? And they try to wave that off by saying that the ghost only speaks Hungarian, but then there's a Ouija board scene where the ghost gives them words in Hungarian anyway, and they manage to translate them. Why not have the ghost write the message out, and then they will say, oh, well, it's clearly a language, let's translate it, and then they translate it.
Well, living people, are stupid. You're assuming this ghost is intelligent. The ghost could just be stupid too.
What really pissed me off is when I got to the end, and every single thing that the author had set up over the course of the story paid off in such a convenient way that was ridiculous. It was making me think of Signs, and the way at the end you have all these things that tie together at the end. And the story ends the way it does because all these pieces are in place very strategically. But that's part of the point of the movie. That's part of where the signs, that's part of what the title of the movie is. That's what the movie is all these pieces that are there for a reason. But in this story, they just coincidentally happen to all tie in together. It was so contrived, so dumb. And it even got to the point where, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I wonder how he's going to tie this other thing into it. And then it would pop up. And then the next thing. And it was just, oh man, it was so much. So I hated it. I thought it was really stupid. It was a very fast read. It was entertaining as it went along in a good, bad movie kind of way. It was making me think of Megan or Smile, a couple movies I've talked about before that were kind of good, bad movies. But just like those, this one was not quite bad enough to be that entertaining. Like, it was entertaining while it went on, but I would not recommend it, and I would never go back and read it again. And by the end of it, I was pretty pissed. So, did I think it was good? No. I read The Fisherman from 2016 by John Langan. This was the opposite of Hidden Pictures. It was another horror book, but this one is very literary. It's very much a slow burn. This guy loses his wife and has nothing else going on in his life, so he just goes fishing all the time. And he meets this other guy that's in the same situation, so they kind of become friends. And one day, the second guy says he wants to go out to this obscure creek that seems to be hard to find information on. And on the way there, they stop at a diner where the first guy asks questions, asks if anyone knows anything about this place they're going to, and the owner of the diner ends up telling them a story that makes up a little over half of the book. It's a story that he got from a priest who got it from this old woman, and it's the old woman's story from when she was a child. So you're going back like 4 different layers of story because the whole thing is being narrated to you in the first place by the first guy. And she talks about how as a child they immigrated from Germany to New York, and her father gets a job at a work site where they're redirecting a river. There's a lot of water in this book. It kind of ties into everything. And one day, this guy on the work site loses his wife in an accident, and she ends up showing up again later, seemingly alive, but clearly not normal. She's acting really weird. Her body is still all mangled from where she got run over by a bunch of donkeys or whatever they were. And she keeps whispering things to people that seem to really disturb them. And it turns out the little girl's father has some knowledge of the occult, and he thinks he knows what's going on and how to deal with it. So he gathers up kind of a posse, and they go to deal with this woman, and they end up going back to the source, which is the Fisherman, this mysterious guy that's been living with this rich guy out in this mansion. And they go to deal with him, and the book opens up in scale to a huge degree to take in reality and other dimensions and all kinds of stuff. And it was really, really cool. I really liked that the author doesn't explain everything. You don't even really know who the fisherman is by the end of the book or what exactly he's trying to do, but there's definitely a Pet Sematary angle to it, bringing loved ones, deceased loved ones back, but they are not, they're not the real people that they used to be. So it does get back to the two main guys, and it is a satisfying book. I wish there was a little bit more to the ending, but I can't say that it was bad or anything. I thought the book was really good. The writing is really good. The whole story and concept and the way everything played out really worked. I thought it was great. I picked it up because there was a blurb on the cover comparing it to Robert E. Howard, who I've talked about before as being my favorite writer. I can see what they were going for. It wouldn't be the first connection I would think of drawing, but I can see where they're coming from. I would say if this was made into a movie, if you're a fan of Robert Eggers, I would say this is kind of the book equivalent of something like that. I feel like he would be the right director to make a movie out of this. So I really liked it. I finished playing BioShock from 2007.
Has your opinion changed from last month?
I still have the same opinions I did before.
Okay.
One of the things I complained about is that you don't meet any of the other characters that you're talking to over the radio. And now that I've played it, I understand why they made that choice, and it makes sense from the story perspective. But for me, it felt like the game design and the way the narrative is presented are kind of at odds with each other. Because the game itself, in terms of gameplay, it's way too long, I thought. There were times when I thought the game was ending and then it would just keep going. And it's a lot of just going through hallways and shooting everything and exploring and whatever. So it's very much an action-y game from that perspective with like kind of horror elements to it. But then the story is trying to be deeper. The way they conveyed the story didn't really fit with the gameplay. And it made me, I had so many questions about how Rapture was supposed to work, because you hear about normal people and you keep getting these tape recordings that you find around from other people, but you never see any of them. You sometimes see people being killed by these splicers or whatever, but you never see any of them just there. So it made the world feel less believable, and it made it feel more like a video game. So from the game design perspective, it felt like a video game. It felt very video gamey, but it felt like the story and the way they were presenting the story was trying to be something else that didn't really fit with that. And I could see some people really, really liking it. I could see the twists really impacting people. For me, they didn't, because I was never that invested in the first place. So I thought they were interesting from an intellectual perspective, but they didn't impact me emotionally at all.
I guess you'll have to play BioShock 2. Would you kindly play BioShock 2?
I will play the second one, but I don't know when. I've been playing Fallout New Vegas from 2010. I'm playing it on hardcore mode and on very hard difficulty. I think there's another difficulty above that, I'm not sure. But it's not as hard as I would have expected. I feel like it's not as hard as Fallout 3 was. And also survival mode in Fallout 4 seemed to have some additional difficulty over this one. And I also remember it being a lot harder on survival mode or hardcore mode or whatever. At least the way I play it, you have to find a place to sleep in order to save. And in this one, it seems like it's easy to find a place to sleep. Whereas in 3 and 4, I remember really struggling sometimes. There would be times when I just wanted to stop playing the game, but I had to go find a place to sleep. Which, in a way, it's good now that I have less time, for it to be easy for me to find a place to save. But it also makes the game feel easier. It lowers the stakes a lot when it's not like, oh, if I die, I'm going to have to play this whole part again. It's like, no, I just saved over here, so I can just do it again. I definitely don't like it as much as 3 or 4, and I think part of it is just the environment. I'm glad that it's different from the others, but being out in the desert and having these wide open expanses of nothing, it's just not as interesting. And I feel like the game, I'm getting the impression from how much I'm progressing through it, that it's going to be a lot shorter and simpler than 3 and 4. I don't know if that's actually the case. If you know in the comments, let me know, because I am curious. But I get the impression that it'll be a lot quicker to get through. And I will say I really like the Caravan card game that they put in here. It's very addictive. It's very well designed. I really like it. And I like the way different characters that you play against play in different ways. You can kind of recognize certain things that different characters do. And it's really cool. And one thing that I really appreciate that they did here that I've never seen in another game is I have a tendency to be that person that keeps clicking buttons to try to get past screens and stuff. Like if I accidentally choose the same dialogue option and I have to sit through the same dialogue again, I'll just keep hitting X to skip through it. And in a lot of other games, I accidentally hit it too many times and then I have to go through it again, or I accidentally pick something I didn't mean to pick. In this game, when you finish a dialogue session or whatever, before you can pick the next option, there's a very short amount of time where you can't pick one. And you would only notice it if you were already hitting the button as soon as the previous one was done. For most people, they probably wouldn't notice that. But for me, it prevents me from accidentally picking the wrong one, lets me see what I'm looking at, and then I can go pick it. So for someone like that who just gets impatient having to sit through the same thing over and over again, it's very useful and very much appreciated. Makes me think of the opposite would be Silent Hill 3, where you examine things in the environment and it doesn't pause the game or anything. And if you just move your character a little bit, it'll take you out of that. And there's a lot of unique text in that game where if you went past it the first time, the next time you go to try to check it again, it's not going to give you the same text. So you missed it. And if you get attacked by an enemy, sometimes you'll miss text because you'll be reading it and then it'll knock you aside. And then the next time you go back, it won't be the same text. So that was really frustrating in Silent Hill 3. Thankfully, that's the only Silent Hill that did it like that. And this game does the opposite and prevents you from accidentally skipping text. And it was great. So I will keep playing that going forward. And that's everything I did this month. So what did you check out?
I watched Squid Game Season 2 from 2024. I watched first season of the show, and I really only remembered the basic concept of surviving through the games to win a lot of money. And it's a good thing they had a Season 1 recap at the beginning of this one, because there was a lot of character stuff that I completely forgot. I thought this season was good, and since they were rehashing the whole game idea, that initial surprise and suspense didn't really exist anymore. So this time it's more focused on the main dude and others' character development as opposed to the scenario providing the bulk of the narrative content. His motivation just to kind of kickstart the whole thing is pretty cliche of, I want to stop this thing from the inside, because he doesn't have a plan other than, once I get back inside, I'm going to stop it. So that was pretty flimsy. And once he gets inside and things are not exactly the same as before, he says, shit. So was making a second season a good idea? From a storytelling perspective, not really. From a popularity and cash perspective, yes. I didn't think it was bad. And the characters were well defined, sometimes to a comedic or one-dimensional degree, but I preferred that to only one or two characters standing out, because your whole show is based around their interactions and personalities, so they gotta be there. And in the first season, there was a guy participating who turned out to be in charge of the whole thing, and in this season, they couldn't really do that again. So they take a guy who's integral to the whole process, and they make him a participant, but we as the audience know from the beginning that he is. And it worked okay. And the end of this one definitely felt like an intermission point, so we'll see what happens. I watched Memories of Murder from 2003, which is one of Bong Joon-ho's movies that I have not seen before, and I expected it to be good, because I like him as a director, and the movie was really good. You've seen this one, yeah?
Yeah, I think this is his best movie of the ones that I've seen. It's not my favorite, but I think it's the best.
I agree. So this is 1980s, there's a series of murders, and the police department is pretty much at a loss, so they try to essentially force solve it by coercing confessions and things like that. But then a better detective comes in to help them, and they eventually tie some stuff together, and it would ruin it to say much more, but it's definitely worth checking out. And this is not a genre that I typically gravitate to, but a good movie is a good movie. And it's also great to see a movie from this time period that is not complete garbage, because the early 2000s, at least over in the States, were not a good time.
Very true.
I watched Prey from 2022. You've seen this one.
I have not.
Okay. I remember this getting a lot of acclaim when it came out, and I just chalked it up to that general Hollywood hype, and I didn't really care, but I had a chance to watch it this month. And I can say that while this movie is better than most of the other Predator movies, it definitely does not stand up to the hype, especially as it slowly devolves from something relatively interesting to generic Predator movie tropes. It is set in 18th century North America, and it's focused on a Comanche girl who struggles to be seen as she wants to be seen as a hunter, and she hasn't proven herself in the eyes of the tribe, but she keeps trying. And one day she sees the Predator ship come down, and they all keep finding a bunch of slaughtered animals that aren't typical, and eventually the Predator shows up. And there's also a group of French fur hunter/traders in the area, so that's the excuse for the eventual huge Predator slaughter scene. The movie was exactly what I expected, just set in a different time period, and the bar for Predator movies is not very high. So this got kind of a half shrug from me instead of a full shrug. But I was absolutely appalled by the amount of CGI animals in this movie. I had to double check that I wasn't watching the new freaking Lion King. From what I remember, there were deer, wolves, rabbits, lions, buffalo, bears, rattlesnakes, mice, and none of them look good.
The one question I had was how were the effects, so I guess now I know.
She had a dog, and I'm surprised they actually gave her a dog. The movie was released in English, but there is a full Comanche dub with the original cast actually doing the dub. I would have preferred that that was the default language of the movie. And the English speaking was modern English speaking, with inflections and stuff, which really hurt the whole thing. It turned it from a movie into, oh, they're acting and wearing period costumes. But all the French guys were speaking French, so it was inconsistent in that way too.
So it was like Nosferatu.
Yeah, that's kind of when you were talking about that, I was thinking about this. There was also way too much focus on the Predator's gadgets. And I understand, none of these people would know what electricity is. But the first time a little blinking light slices up everybody, anytime there's a blinking light, don't keep staring at it, because you're going to get sliced up. The movie was more interesting when it was going for a character-driven piece rather than a generic Predator movie. But at the end of the day, it's a Predator movie, so that's what it's going to do.
Do you know who the director was? Wasn't it somebody who did something? I don't know.
Likely, yes. I watched a movie called Haywire from 2011, which was an action spy movie. It was pretty standard by the numbers. I'm struggling to remember what it was even about. There were a lot of characters in this movie, and there was not enough runtime to give them all a reason for being in the movie at all. And to kind of compensate, to pack more story into the runtime than the movie could do, there's this giant extended scene where the protagonist is driving and she's explaining to a passenger, this is what's happened so far. So it's like an abridged movie inside of the movie. Not really successful. The music, I thought the score felt like I was watching Ocean's 11, the reboot, and it turns out it was the same guy. But I will say the action, the fighting, was pretty legit. There weren't too many Hollywood edit cuts. You know how they do it to make it seem more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the main actress was an actual MMA fighter, so that gives it a little more credit. Yeah, I can't remember what the plot was. She was assigned to either save somebody or kill somebody, but she got double-crossed, and she has to find out who's responsible.
And could she actually act if she was originally a fighter or whatever?
It was better than the people Tony Jaa puts in his movies.
I think anybody's better than those, but okay.
I watched a movie from 1983 called Brainstorm, which could be about anything. I know you're just waiting to see what it's actually about.
It sounds familiar, but I can't think of what it is.
It's got Christopher Walken and Louise Fletcher, and they make this sensory headset where you put it on, and if someone's wearing the partner headset, you can experience whatever they're experiencing. So they show it by Christopher Walken sitting in a room by himself, and the other guy's walking around, and he's like eating steak, touching various objects, and Christopher Walken is experiencing those things himself via brain stuff.
I hope they show him just like drooling and licking his lips when the guy's eating the steak.
No, unfortunately not.
Damn.
But he almost kills him when he says, hey, this will be a funny joke, and he takes his helmet off and puts it on a monkey, and Christopher Walken's just having a complete seizure in the other room. And the experiences can also be recorded, so in addition to reliving them in the moment, you can relive them later. So they go through all their tests, they're successful, and that's when the investors come in, and naturally some of them are military, so there's a whole, I don't want my research weaponized argument going on. And there's a few mishaps, and people who use it for, sex and whatever. But the crux of the problems come when Louise Fletcher is by herself. She did really good in this movie, by the way. And she is having a heart attack, and after she calls for help, she decides to put on the helmet and record this sensory experience. And she ends up dying. So it's all recorded, and the military scientists who have taken over this whole project, they want to use her death recording, her pain and death recording, as the first step in their military experiments for torture and whatever. And Christopher Walken is trying to stop them, but he's been shut out, so he has to sabotage the whole thing. So it's 1983, so, computer hacking is very cool. And eventually, it gets a little weird, because with Louise Fletcher's recording, Christopher Walken witnesses what happens after you die. And it goes off the rails a little bit. It gets kind of cozy, feel-goody, with like memories and stuff. It was an interesting sci-fi movie, and another one where Christopher Walken just happens to be in it. Like that Communion one I talked about a while back, where he dances with the aliens. I think what helped this one hold together a little bit more was the strength of the acting. And it's the only thing I've ever seen Cliff Robertson in, other than Spider-Man and some random Twilight Zone episode. So that was cool. I watched Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga from 2024. Have you seen this one yet?
I have not.
Okay. I watched this back to back with Fury Road, which for me is right at the top of this series along with The Road Warrior. In Furiosa, visually everything was very clean, which sounds weird to say for a Mad Max movie, where one of the characters is dirt. I like the endless desolation of the wasteland, but I didn't get that from this movie, and part of it was characters keep regularly popping around to all these giant cities, essentially. It made the whole world seem very small and also organized, which also doesn't really align with the Mad Max lore. And something else that detracted from the post-apocalyptic feel was that for the majority of the movie, and this is so weird just saying it out loud, everybody was driving around on these really nice and well-maintained paved roads. The cinematography was very static. Fury Road had a lot of cool shots and seemed way more thought out. This movie was very boilerplate. And that's really odd considering that I'm pretty sure a lot of the people behind this movie were also behind Fury Road. And I read that there were 10 times the amount of CG elements compared to Fury Road, and I believe it.
That's just what I wanted to hear.
That was what turned me off from watching this for so long. And I'm surprised Miller would be okay with that. Maybe he's just getting old.
That's what I was about to say.
And this movie is called Furiosa, so it's supposed to focus on the character of Furiosa. But Fury Road did a better job. This movie felt like Miller wanted to explore the world that he had created. He took a series Bible and said, let's just make this into a movie. And someone was like, well, what's the story? And he was like, oh, yeah. In Fury Road, the protagonists are moving towards a goal, and we as the viewers root for them and watch them overcome these impossible obstacles that are thrown their way. And this movie started like that for the first 10%, but then it threw in 80% of non-Furiosa stuff, and then went back to her for the last 10%. Because in Fury Road, you have a reason to care about what they're doing. And in Furiosa, the bulk of the movie is all of the bad guys bickering about political bullshit. And I know that's what you want from a Mad Max movie, am I right? We're not supposed to like these guys. They're all the bad guys. So why would I give a shit that they're not getting what they want? And why would I listen to them argue with each other? It painted them as whiny children. I'll use Immortan Joe as an example. So he was the main antagonist in Fury Road. In that movie, the entire presentation of him is his character. He is regarded as a god by his followers. I mean, his name is Immortan Joe. The framing, the camera work around him accentuates how big he is in that world. He barely has any dialogue in that movie, and when he does speak, it's a big deal. He's perceived as this unstoppable threat, and they have to sacrifice so much to finally get away from him and beat him. But in Furiosa, he's just some dude standing around in a regular room having conversations with other dudes. And it immediately made me think of the Phantom Menace. Because you watch Return of the Jedi, and you see the Emperor just wipe the floor with everybody. He's 10 steps ahead of everybody else. And then you get to the Phantom Menace, and Palpatine is just droning on and on about trade negotiations and the political ramifications of shit. That's what happened here. But by far, the worst part of this movie, without a doubt, was Chris Hemsworth, who was on the poster, really big. His character did not fit into this world at all. Miller tried at the very end to justify why he was such a dumbass, but it was way too little, way too late. And it didn't even work. Chris Hemsworth is annoying, and he's annoying in this movie. His character is not threatening. He doesn't even do that much. He doesn't have the respect of the people following him, even from the beginning. You think of characters like Humongous and Immortan Joe. They are feared, even by the people who are following them. They're respected, and Hemsworth is not. Even in the opening scene, people are turning against him. And eventually, he ends up running away like a little bitch. That's the antagonist of this movie, set in this world where past antagonists have been terrifying and imposing and impossible to overcome. And Hemsworth said in an interview that he based his character and delivery on a carnival barker, which comes through 100%. and was also 100% the wrong decision. Fury Road was a simple idea. Escape to freedom, safety, and home. Everything else was extra. Furiosa starts with the simple idea of escaping to go home, but then gets shoved aside for 2 hours while Miller flexes showing everything he's created and how cool he wants you to know it is. I already know how cool it is. I watched it. And it wasn't even difficult for Anya Taylor-Joy, who plays Furiosa, to find and stop Chris Hemsworth. She even has a bunch of time to kill before doing it. The whole movie happens on her schedule, which from a writing perspective doesn't really make a lot of sense. The movie should be working against her, but it's actually working for her. It was weird. And the fact that the other antagonists are all saying how stupid and annoying Chris Hemsworth is doesn't do his character any favors. But he's the main bad guy. I don't doubt that Miller put in the care and effort he normally does for Mad Max movies, but it wasn't strong enough to turn out a good result in this case. I think the majority of it was there were too many moving parts in a series where things are traditionally very focused on a few or even one goal. Overall, this was a huge disappointment, especially watching it immediately after Fury Road. Anya Taylor-Joy did a good job for the little bit she had, which should have been more, considering the movie was titled after her character.
People in the comments are going to say that Max wasn't the main character of Fury Road, so I'm just going to say it first. I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just saying people are going to say that.
The main character of Furiosa, there isn't one, really.
I would say there's not really one in Fury Road either.
I would say it's Furiosa. She's leading everybody. She's barking out orders, she's giving directions, she's deciding what happens.
Yeah, but so is Mon Mothma in Return of the Jedi, but she's not the main character.
I disagree.
I don't know. I'm not saying I disagree with the way you're talking about it. I'm just saying people are going to say that in the comments.
Yeah, they can say what they want. One thing that did amuse me was, in order to find her home, Furiosa follows this constellation, right? And she can't forget what the constellation is, so she tattoos it on her arm. And that's the arm that eventually gets torn off. But she has it tattooed on her for years. You're telling me she wouldn't memorize that constellation? Because after her arm gets torn off, she's like, I'll never find my way home now. I was like, what, you idiot.
Yeah, that's really funny.
Still been watching Dragon Ball DAIMA. Still really enjoying it. Humor's good. The action scenes are really good too. Like the fights, there's no filler, which Dragon Ball can be very guilty of. I read a 1924 novel by a Russian guy that I'm not even going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce correctly. And this was also mentioned by somebody in the comments. And that made me interested to check it out. It's called Oui, like W-E. If it were French, it would be O-U-I. It's set in a future where a nation is under the rule of a totalitarian regime. And this book is often pointed to as a precursor to things like 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. But a difference here is the society appears to be working very well because everybody's on board. And the protagonist actually wants what the rulers are dishing out. And the whole society is built on mathematical precision. All decisions are made and executed based on calculated mathematical reason. And the main dude himself is a mathematician in this society. So he's all about it. And his responsibility is building this big spaceship, which is, when it's done, it's going to take this society to planets unknown to continue to spread their way of life. And he struggles and gets annoyed with things that don't align perfectly in the world. And it could be something as simple as, the sky is perfect, except that one cloud. What the f***? And the rulers haven't figured out how to make every aspect of life fit into this perfect mathematical reasoning. And even people, they don't have names, they all have numbers. So there's that little tiny bit of humanity they're still trying to squash. And of course, there's a faction of people who don't agree. And eventually the protagonist meets a woman who starts to get him to think a different way. But instead of being on board, it's a constant struggle between I want things to be perfect and I'm getting these weird emotions and stuff. So at one point he even goes to the hospital and he's like, hey, I'm sick. And someone's like, damn, it sounds like you have a soul. That's bad. It was interesting. He's writing it as a series of records in a journal to an unknown reader. He is way too verbose. So much talking, unnecessary, I thought. It probably added 30% of material to the book. And his imagery is also very weird and hard to follow at times. And eventually the society starts to collapse, and he's struggling with whether he should join or should he hold up this mantle of society. And the last push is an operation by the rulers to essentially destroy the part of the brain that allows independent thinking and imagination. And there were some odd sci-fi elements that just kind of popped out of nowhere. Like when he journeys to the other side of the wall that's like surrounding where he is, and he gets to a gathering with all of the rebel people, and it turns out that humanity has split. So there's this whole group of people who are covered in fur, but it just kind of pops out of nowhere and then doesn't really come up again. Except at one point he's looking at his hands and he's like, damn, my hand's all hairy. God, I'm like one of the fur people. So yeah, there were some things that felt not quite thought out.
I mean, it sounds like an Eloy versus Morlocks kind of thing with that.
Yeah, but it wasn't really, because nobody in the one state knew about those other people. It was definitely an interesting read, and I can totally see how it influenced later stuff, but it wasn't that exciting of a read. And because of the nature of the content, I don't think it was actually published in Russia until the 1980s, maybe. I'm currently reading The Naked Truth, which is a completely fictional autobiography by Leslie Nielsen and David Fisher. And I wasn't sure what this book was going to be like. This book is really funny because it's so ridiculous. I have never seen so much wordplay and puns just condensed into one piece of material.
Well, of course you would like it then.
Every sentence, every chapter, everything ends in a joke. There's so many jokes. And if you've seen The Naked Gun, because this, I mean, obviously the title is tied to that. This is at the height of his goofiness. If you imagine a whole book as a Frank Drebin monologue, that's what this book is. And I'm pretty sure David Fisher wrote most of it. I mean, Leslie Nielsen, he's a funny guy, but I can't see him being this smart. No offense. Is he even alive?
I think so. I don't know. He died in 2010. Jeez.
Oh, man. Okay.
No wonder movies haven't been funny in 15 years or whatever.
And this book came out in 1993. I've had to read it in small chunks because it's just too much sometimes to take all at once. Right up my alley, though.
Because it's dumb. Okay.
He basically just inserts himself through the history of Hollywood and, claims he was part of all these huge movies that he wasn't actually part of and knew all these people he didn't actually know.
You sure you didn't read Christopher Lee's autobiography again?
Oh, I wonder how long it's going to be before people widely accept that he made up a lot of his life.
Probably never. Well, he was also a good actor and, a respectable actor.
Son of a bitch.
I mean, it's like Neil Adams. I wonder, he still goes by on his, or I guess I should say his name still gets by on his reputation for the good stuff that he did, but I don't think most people look at him the way I do as a piece of shit.
I played Donkey Kong Land 3, which was the downgrade port of Donkey Kong Country 3, which is an excellent platformer, by the way. I can't imagine playing this game on an original Game Boy. I had the first Donkey Kong Land, and it was tough to make out sprites against the background in that one. And that was on original Game Boy. There's no backlit shit going on here. This is the pea green old school DMG. And for 3, this one is even crazier. It is wild. Okay, it's super impressive that they got so much to fit on a single Game Boy cartridge. And so much is copied from the Super Nintendo version. I was so impressed. But if I was not playing this on a TV, I would not have continued for very long because I wouldn't be able to tell what the hell was going on. So from a technical perspective, well done. From a gameplay perspective, f*** you. I played this 2023 game that's been on my radar since I read about it. I just haven't gotten around to getting it, called Chants of Sennaar. Have you heard of this at all?
I have not.
Okay, this game was right up my alley. It is a narrative-driven puzzle game that is based on language. So you are a character in essentially the Tower of Babel. So every level of the tower has a different society on it, and they all have their own language. And your job is to decipher their language, and they all use logographic systems. So you decipher the language and you use what you've learned to solve puzzles to get to the next level of the tower. So you can learn from people talking to you, you can learn from signs around the place, you can learn from people talking to each other, and you have to use context to figure out what symbols mean and then how they work together. And then once you do it and you get to the next level of the tower, then you got to do it all over again. It was really, really well put together. I can't imagine the development cycle for this. It's probably somebody super intelligent and probably with a lot of experience in like decryption, encryption stuff. I liked it a lot. It was not a super long game, I think maybe 10 hours. And it's not just figuring out what different symbols mean and how they work together. You also have to learn the syntax. So, one society might be subject, verb, object, but another one might be object, subject, verb. Or if they're doing plural of nouns, they use a symbol, or some do two symbols at once. Or if they're doing a negative, they'll put symbols on the outside of the whole sentence. It was really compelling. And I think on a PC, this would be easy to do, to keep track of everything. I was playing it on a console, and it was very cumbersome to take notes via a controller. So I had a physical notebook that I was actually making notes in, and I think that was actually the best way to do it.
This sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. Made me feel like I was playing, Myst back in the mid-90s. There's a good ending and there's a bad ending. And the bad ending is you just get to the top of the tower. You did it. Great. And the good ending involves making it to the top of the tower, but then backtracking. And backtracking is not that hard because there's like warp points and stuff. And you have to translate between the cultures. So that was cool. I actually wish there was more of that throughout the game. I think even if it was optional, I would have liked to have done more of that. But super compelling. I'm really happy I finally got around to it. If it sounds interesting at all, I would check it out. And the last thing I've been playing, which has taken over my whole life, is Diablo III. And I know I'm late to the party because everyone's on Diablo 4 right now. But I was playing Gauntlet Dark Legacy, and somebody said, have you ever played Diablo? And I had played Diablo 2 a little bit when it came out way back in the day, but I didn't really get it because I didn't have the time to do it. I was too busy with other shit. But I had bought Diablo 3 a while ago, and I said, I'll try that out. This game is my life right now. I'm neglecting my job. I'm neglecting my family. I'm neglecting my health to just keep playing Diablo 3.
That doesn't sound much different from usual, though.
Good one. If my kid wasn't passed out from starvation, they would be angry at you. And it's Blizzard. Blizzard's good. Or Blizzard was good. I don't really keep track of Blizzard anymore. But back in the day, they were unstoppable. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And that's everything I did this month. Okay, so we have been in copyright hell for our Star Trek Generations review. We have tried everything under the sun to try and get this video approved.
And it still might get approved in the state that we're trying right now, but we'll see.
Did you dispute those parts that got rejected again?
Oh, they got rejected again?
Yeah.
Well, shit.
And the issue is because we're putting in footage of the movie. And it's not even extended lengths. It's maybe 3 or 4 seconds at a time. And that's what we're getting hit on. So I think we finally might have to cave and do a slideshow of still images while we're talking, which to me is not nearly as good. But I want to get this video out somehow.
Yeah, it would be more like the approach we took with like our Fallout video or Godzilla -1 or the Batman Caped Crusader or something like that. Or like these videos, kind of.
And we also finished our recording of First Contact, but I haven't started putting that all together because I want to see what we end up having to do with this one. But we are moving forward on things.
So believe us, we are as frustrated as you are in waiting for this.
I think maybe 1 or 2 people got to see our Generations video before it got flagged the first time. So please, gloat in the comments. So thanks for being patient.
We will keep trying to make quality content. We haven't succeeded yet, but hopefully we'll get there someday.